Greetings. Welcome back to the Cape Lead Revolution. This is Chachi once again. As you can tell, a little bit different surroundings. I'm midway through a move from our first house here in Phoenix. Now we just bought a house. So moving in July in Phoenix while your wife is seriously like 20 months pregnant, she could pop at any moment. It's not the suggested thing to do, but amazing opportunity happened last week. Had to jump on it. So absolutely thrilled, humbled, and excited to have my first soldier on the Cape Lead Revolution. So everyone, I would like to introduce you to Command Sergeant Major retired Scott Schroeder, who retired as the Command Sergeant Major for U.S. Army Forces Command out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Scott, welcome to the Cape Lead Revolution.
Hey, Chachi, it's an honor to be on here with you. I appreciate you asking me.
You bet. So through the miracle of social media, love that we're able to link up. And instantly in our first conversation, I really found that you and I are kindred spirits on the same path and have seen a lot of the same things in leadership. And we just want to share what we know and hopefully make airmen and people and soldiers better. But if you don't mind, if you mind taking a few minutes to introduce yourself to our guests and viewers.
Sure. I'm Scott Schroeder, and I was in the Army for 34 years. Like you said, I served at U.S. Army Forces Command. Most people don't know what that is, and I really didn't know what it was until I was there, and it took me about 6 months to really figure out what it really was. And before that, I was at 3 Corps, and you were there. So, Chachi, I think it's really amazing that so much of our career has crossed over and paralleled each other. You being in the Air Force and myself being in the Army, really, for the audience that's on here. I did find you through social media, and with part of my other job, I was looking at, cause I'm looking at JFO type stuff. And so I was looking at JTAC training and so I was looking at that stuff, and then I ran across your name. So I went to LinkedIn and checked you out. And so that's how I ended up reaching out to you on LinkedIn to check that out. And when we communicated, I reclassified to the infantry. My first duty station was 2505. You've been there.
Yeah, that was my first battalion to support as a young 19-year-old at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Yeah, and then we were at 3 Corps together, and or not together, but I mean you were at 3 Corps. I was at the Great Place too for a little bit. I mean it's just amazing that we never really just ran across each other. All in parallel, so it was awesome. So, I mean, 34 years. I love my career. I wouldn't have changed anything.
So tell us about some of your jobs and assignments and everything that you had. Some of the stuff that maybe some key points during your career that put you on your path, and where you fell in love with like the actual love of leadership and how that played out for you.
Yeah, well, really like a lot of people, I joined the Army and I had no plan. I had no plan to make it a career, and I was going to try to improve my place in life. I was working in a lumber yard, and I learned a lot of great things and worked with a lot of great people. And probably the best move I ever made was getting out of the town that I was growing up in, just to get out and go see something else. And I joined the Army as an electronics mechanic. And then when it was time for me to re-enlist, I mean, there's so many daggone stories and routes we could go down, but I won't go there. When it was time for me to re-enlist, I decided to reclassify to the infantry. So from an electronics mechanic on a nuclear-capable missile to reclassifying as an infantryman. So went to Fort Benning, went to AIT, got to Fort Bragg. I wasn't even 6 weeks out of AIT for the infantry that I went to Ranger School. I was at Fort Bragg, and I had no clue what I was doing. I had absolutely no idea what the odds were against me being able to complete that course. And so I tell people I was ignorant what the odds were, so I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to make it. And so it was pretty good. So I went through that, became a squad leader in the 82nd, team leader, squad leader in the 82nd. Went down to 3rd Ranger Battalion, was there for a few years, became a platoon sergeant, and went off to be a drill sergeant. Got picked to be a drill sergeant. Didn't want to do it. Went kicking and screaming, and probably one of the better jobs that I had, because it forced me to mature, get outside of my comfort zone again. And then 25th ID as a platoon sergeant ops guy, and most of my time was all operational. So 25th, came to the 101st, came back to the 101st, stayed there as a battalion brigade division sergeant major, and then went to 3 Corps as the Corps, and then Force Com. That's pretty much it.
So looking back on your career, so number one, congratulations on such an amazingly successful career. So I've read the first half of your book, which we'll talk about later. But again, you're very blunt, you're very straightforward, you're very vulnerable, you're very authentic, right? And so coming in from it seems like how you grew up to all the success that you've had, absolutely congratulations. That is just phenomenal. And so looking back, for young Private Schroeder coming into the U.S. Army, in your wildest dreams, would you have anticipated that this is where your career would take you?
No. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't looking. I mean, I wasn't able to look that far forward. In fact, some cases I can't look that far forward right now. It was what's next. I was never what's next. It's hey, and this is what I would tell a lot of young leaders, young soldiers that would say, hey, how do I get to where you are? Don't focus on what's next. Focus on what you're doing. If you want to be the next, grade or the next position or a promotion, focus on what you're doing now to be the best at it that you can be. Find things that you enjoy doing and gravitate towards those. But I would tell myself, if I was to go back and tell myself, a couple things that to make myself better, I would say, one, be curious. I mean, it's really important to have a sense of curiosity and to try to understand how things work, and then the other would be, don't be afraid to fail. I told the story about Ranger School, but I had no clue what the odds were against me, and it worked out pretty easily. I mean, I didn't find a problem going through. I just did what the Ranger instructor told me to do, and I did it the way they told us to do it, and stay awake and carry your load and do your best, and I got through.
So looking back, when you went out and would meet with some of the young soldiers as either a Corps Sergeant Major or Force Com, what were some of the conversations? Is there anything that struck you as odd about the younger generation or as amazing about the younger generation?
No, I mean, I thought they were great. I had no problems with them. I don't think they were any different than what we were.
Absolutely.
I don't think they're any different than what we were. I think the main difference is, all the things that they expect are the same things that we expected when we were coming up. The only thing is, they demand it. I mean, they demand it. They need to know why. We were more of a, hey, shut up and color kind of generation.
Amen. And for me, with our forces being so small and our mission being so vast, so diverse, and so wide, soldiers, everyone, they need to know why, right? When we're so limited and we have the best communication system the world has ever seen, like, people need to know why.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that everything that we wanted, we wanted those things. I mean, we wanted mentorship, we wanted development, we wanted opportunities, we wanted all those things. They want those too, and it's the same in the service and outside of the service. I mean, millennials want that stuff, and they're not willing to wait for it. And conditions have really changed too, where in the private sector, where millennials, back in back if we had been in the private sector coming up instead of being in the military, we would have been tied to a company because we would have been tied to them for a pension or retirements. But with 401ks and things like that, millennials aren't tied to those companies like they are, like they were back then. So they will jump. So if they're not getting what they need or what they want, they'll jump to another company.
So when did, and again, I completely support all of that. And again, there was a time and a place for the just do what you're told, right? There was, and again,
Right.
we had a conversation about obedience versus discipline, and that was part of it. But looking back, as you found that you were becoming more and more successful, at what point in your career did leadership, like the purity of leadership, reach out and kind of grab you and say, this is going to be my focus for quite a while?
I don't know. I'm not exactly certain, like purity of, when you talk about the purity of leadership or just that I wanted to be a leader, I think, I believe it was my first enlistment. I really think it was my first enlistment. Now, I didn't always have good leadership. Some of it wasn't always positive leadership. I wasn't always a positive role model. I did some things I shouldn't have done. And I mean, that's something that I would speak to subordinates and subordinate leaders too. We got to have room to fail. I mean, it's okay to do stupid stuff. There's a few things that you can't do, right? I mean, there's certain things that you can't do, but you've got to grow from some mistakes that you make. And you got to be able to find the potential and see the potential in others. So I think leadership, first person you got to lead is yourself, right? So I was able to lead myself, and then being part of a team. I always liked being part of a team and teamwork. And so I think my first enlistment, I felt I was part of a team, and I would perform my role inside that team. And I think that's really important. And I carried that in time and I would often get frustrated with our peers who would not accept their role. I mean, I think, and one of the things I think it's important for all mid-level and even senior leaders, especially enlisted leaders, is understand your role, accept your role, and appreciate your role. I mean, a lot of times sometimes I would ask young soldiers questions as a senior leader, and they would say, hey, I don't know, Sergeant Major, I'm just a saw gunner. And I say, well, you're not just a saw gunner. I mean, you are the saw gunner. And when your squad needs accurate suppressive fires, you're the only one that can deliver those. And so you're not just a saw gunner. And so understanding and appreciating your role is critical. And then for leaders at all echelons, they need to understand their role, but they also need to understand their organization, what the mission is of their organization, what the priorities of that organization are, how they and their team help achieve success in the organization, and how they piece in what are the other pieces of the organization, how they interact with those to help make the mission successful.
So number one, I absolutely agree. There are so many CAPE concepts right in that little part, just so we can, again, successfully articulate, so we can connect with our soldiers and our airmen and stuff like that. And it was funny because you bring up that maybe on your first enlistment, you weren't the best soldier and you made some mistakes. And I definitely wasn't the best airman. And, today, I know in the Air Force, it may or may not be the same in the Army, was they said, today's Air Force is a one mistake Air Force, which there's probably a certain level of truth to that, but I never believed it. I said, hey, we're not a one mistake Air Force. You just may be a one mistake airman, right? Like depending on that mistake. Would you agree with that? Do you think there's certain levels of truth or still some ability to kind of fudge here and there based off the individual, the circumstances, the environment, things of that nature?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables. I mean, the variables it's the command climate, it's the other leaders in the organization, it's I mean, I used to say UCMJ is non-judicial punishment is fair and unequal. I mean, so two people, Chachi and Scott, I mean, uh, do the same thing, have the same misconduct, but Chachi's a superstar, right? And they're disappointed in Chachi, but they're going to let Chachi, I mean, hey, dude, check it out. Here's your counsel statement. Here's a letter of reprimand, whatever it is. And Scott, hey, this is your administrative separation. Thank you. I mean, so it's fair. It can be fair and unequal, and it's about having potential. So having leaders be able to have the ability to look at individuals and determine whether they have the potential to overcome that misconduct. Shooting the book, I don't know if you got to the point where my first re-enlistment was, I mean, I had 2 meetings with the commander. The first was for UCMJ, and the first was my re-enlistment counseling because I was near the end of my term in service, and the second meeting was for my Article 15.
And that it's really hard from my time as a command chief and a chief inside the Air Force. It's been hard to tell people that, like, if you and I both go out and call it, sadly, a common infraction, Article 15 worthy, is getting a DWI, right? So to that example, people are going to get different punishments based off of their value inside the organization. And people are very quick to judge and say, hey, that's favoritism, right? You're picking favorites and the standards aren't the same for me as they were. Like, no. Your value to the organization, to the unit, is going to be different based off of past performance, right? It's easier for me to cut away a turd than it is to cut away a rock star, right? Because this rock star will eventually recover, but this turd probably isn't going to. And I can addition by subtraction, I can add value to my team by subtracting this person. And so I actually subscribe to that same thought process. People don't think that it's fair at face value, but it absolutely is fair when you look at the holistic view of those 2 individuals.
That's right. And I mean, if it was one size fits all. I mean, if that's how it was, I mean, that would take leadership out of the equation.
You bet. And so as you've gone through your career, do you have? It's funny. My dad's visiting. My dad flew in from Kansas City to help us move in, and he and I were having a conversation, and I have distinct scar tissue from certain assignments, and not necessarily those assignments or those locations, but leaders at those assignments. And I've built up this scar tissue, and I instantly see red when leaders do these things that my leaders there did, right? And so one of the things that I try and do is get people to be upfront about their scar tissue, i.e., if I don't know what your scar tissue is, I may be inadvertently hitting your hot button every single day, and you're ready to wring my neck, but I don't know that bothers you. Are there any things, or is there any scar tissue that you've developed throughout your career? And again, this is like, I view scar tissue as like an extreme pet peeve, right? So are there any scar tissue type of items that you would like to share with us for things that people either must stay away from or need to do?
Yeah, I would say like one of the biggest that I can think of is, when I went to the 82nd and back in the mid to late 80s, there was a lot of hazing. I didn't get hazed, but there was hazing that went on. And even in the Ranger Regiment at the time when I went there was some of that kind of crap going on. And I didn't really appreciate the hey, you need to wrap your arm around. I wasn't really a comforting person when somebody would come in. I didn't want to love on them, but I certainly didn't think you should be hazing them. I believe people should have to prove themselves. Hey, I want to be here. I want to do this, but I really did not like. So when you talk about things I don't like bullies. I don't like hazing. That would get me a little bit frustrated. I don't know if that's where you were going, but and
again, it's different for each individual, right? There are some leaders who just can't communicate, or there are some leaders who think me, or like the biggest flaw that I see is leaders don't see the humanity behind the human weapon system.
All right.
We're going to train our airmen and soldiers, and soldiers are going to have a bad day. Soldiers are going to be human. Soldiers are going to have a human response. Life's going to bite them in the butt from time to time. And, so I have a whole lot of scar tissue when we can't adjust for or allow for basic humanity.
Yeah, I think, so when you mention it like that, when you talk about it like that, the other thing I hate was, as I got more senior, I got to be able to see it, was the bureaucracy. And so especially when it comes to human capital and taking care of troopers, I got so frustrated with bureaucracy. In fact, when I was at ForceCom, we were in a larger meeting, and I forget what we were talking about, but I got on the soapbox about, I spent a lot of time deployed. So I had over 66 months deployed in between Iraq and Afghanistan. And I said, hey, in all my other positions, most of my other positions for the last 12 or 14 years, I've been deploying, and I've been fighting Al Qaeda and the Taliban, and I've been out there, our units have been fighting them. But in my current position, I seem to be fighting bureaucrats, and I seem to get much greater joy out of slaying bureaucrats than I do Al Qaeda and the Taliban, because when you do, I mean, it's helping the organization be better, and it's also helping subordinate commands and soldiers.
So that is absolutely phenomenal, and huge credit in the United States Air Force. Our Chief of Staff, General Dave Goldfein, and our outgoing Chief Master of the Air Force, Khalif Wright, have been really great, and they've told the Air Force, like, hey, commanders, if it doesn't make sense, stop doing it.
Right.
What's the risk? Accept the risk, because so many of our regulations are not written at the same time, and they have overarching connectivity. So one can be written and changed that has trickle-down effect for so many different others. Like, people, if it doesn't make sense, just stop doing it. And again, that they themselves have been fighting that exact problem with all that bureaucracy. And so I think the Air Force has done a great job of that in recent years.
Yeah, you have an order, you have a regulation, then you have your op orders, and then you have all the fragos that are associated with that. And then the same frago changes the thing 3 or 4 times back and forth. You heard the story, order, counter order equals disorder. People get really confused. I mean, it creates a lot of confusion inside the organization.
Thinking about, going back to kind of fighting a lot of the bureaucracy stuff, what are some of the things that you wish you had known sooner, either as a soldier or as a leader, that could have either helped you find success or helped you find greater success?
What would I have? I mean, really, how things run, understanding how things function and operate inside the organization. In fact, even after, I mean, ForceCom is a really big unit, and probably the biggest 2 leadership leaps I made were going from being a battalion sergeant major. So a battalion was roughly between 300 and 700, and a brigade is probably around between 35 and 5,500 troopers. And that was the biggest leap that I ever had to make. And one is understanding how the organization functions, but the other was when I made that large leap, it was getting comfortable with not knowing everything that's going on in the unit. And that was something I had to get comfortable with. And then probably when I went to the installation, so at the installation command, just trying to get around and understand how things function and what kept the organization going. I think those were a couple. So being comfortable not knowing everything, and then trying to figure out how things work.
It's going back to like just one small thing you had said in that sense of like, not knowing the different things that are happening firsthand with the soldiers as you move up and trying to be okay with that is that, it's very odd for me having, obviously been in the Air Force, but been around the Army my entire career, watching this, like a junior enlisted Army perspective to a senior NCO Army perspective was really, really odd because, engaged leadership is absolutely huge, but engaged leadership doesn't mean micromanagement. And
That's right.
as a young airman, as one of the young soldiers there at the 82nd, I couldn't find the distinction at first. I thought it was all micromanagement and doing all that stuff, and it took me a long time to appreciate that. Did you have a similar thing, or did you see soldiers struggling with those two concepts at all?
Sure. So yeah, I'm going to go back because some of the stuff that I was talking about, when you're talking at force comm, force comm level or a core level, I mean, most soldiers, I mean, you're not going to operate at that level, and so and that's okay. I mean, I really never had a vision of trying to work at that level. But to your point, Chachi, on about micromanagement, micro engagement. I would say one thing that I learned, and I wish I would have learned it sooner, that I tried to relate to subordinate leaders was don't try to solve your entry-level soldiers or your young soldiers' problems as the leader, as a leader that's 2 or 3 echelons above where that soldier is. Help their direct line leader solve the problem. And so tee it up for them. It's not for that young soldier who has that problem to know that you helped solve it. They don't need to know that. What they need to know is that their first line supervisor was in a position to help them solve the problem and teeing up for them to solve it. And the other is understanding and as a mid-level, so as a senior NCO, you have to be approachable, accessible, and available. And if you're not those 3, then people aren't going to bring problems to you, one. And then so you're going to end up finding that problems existed, and down at the unit level, leaders are trying to solve those problems, and they don't always solve them to the greatest extent possible. They put a Band-Aid on it when it really needed some surgery, right? And so they're sitting there with a Band-Aid on it, and people either didn't bring the problem to you because you weren't one of those 3, or they just didn't know to bring it to you. And so I think it's important to let people, hey, if you had some problems and you solved them, just let me know what they were, so can make sure that there's not some other resource that we can deliver to make it better. So I think people could consider that as micromanagement, but not always.
Agreed. Fair. And I'll tell you what. With that, we will go to our first break. So everybody, stay tuned, and we will be right back with retired Command Sergeant Major Scott Schroeder. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back from break. Here again with Command Sergeant Major Scott Schroeder. So, Scott, you and I had a chance to talk a little bit on break there, and just kind of double tap some of the stuff that we had in the first half of the podcast. Just kind of want to dig more into the roles and the understandings and the advice that you would give any young aspiring leader, whether it be an NCO or CGO, and what would you tell them to help them find success in whatever endeavor they would have?
Yeah, well, like I said before, understand your role. So I think that's critical. I think that's important in any endeavor. But don't rush things. So don't be in a rush. I mean, enjoy the journey, and try to get everything you can out of that experience. Because one of the things I used to harp, you can't teach experience, right? You can't get that in an NCO PDS. You can't get that in a school. I mean, you have to earn it, and you got to earn it over time, and it does take time. I mean, the things that you need to be a leader at every echelon. I mean, you can't cook it in a microwave either. I mean, and in today's world, I mean, we want microwave meals, so they're almost as good as the real thing. But your experiences in leadership, you got to cook that stuff in a crock pot. It just takes time, and so I would say take your time, don't be in a rush, and then your presence matters. Presence matters, and not just your being present, but what you do while you're present is even more important. And I would tell all leaders, I would never, at the end of my career, uh, and for years and years and years, whenever I'd go out to training or check training or see what was going on, I would not carry a cell phone or a device, because when you pull it out, looking at it, and you're with your troopers on the ground, what you're telling them is what's on that device is more important than what they're doing. And we don't get enough opportunities oftentimes to go out and see our service members out in their environment. So when you're in their environment, be in their environment. You can get back to your environment when you're moving from one place to another. I would say those two. Presence matters. What you do matters.
So huge. And again, if you're just tuning in, again, rewind. I tend to do this from time to time on the podcast. Rewind just a couple seconds. We got back from break. Like there are phenomenal notes there. Like you can't teach experience. And so instantly my mind starts thinking about perspective and how to share perspective. And again, I love the microwave meal. Like you have to go through it. You have to experience and do all that stuff. But the things that you can do is you can read books, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch podcasts, right? You can watch movies, you can study quotes, all that stuff. So do you have any go-tos? Do you have any favorites that you would recommend to anybody?
Yeah, I've got a few. I tell you what, one that I read, and I think every leader, but especially non-commissioned officers, regardless of what service they're from, the Checklist Manifesto is a great book. And it was written by a doctor who was hired by the World Health Organization, that was hired to do study on how they could cut down on the number of deaths that were related to surgeries. And so he studied the aviation industry, he studied construction, he studied investment banking, and he studied all those, and he came up with, for surgeries, the leading cause of death or complication in surgery are due to line infections. And so he developed a checklist and a protocol for surgeries that are used today in surgery. And just like if you ever go into surgery or you're going in there, the team that's in there, the anesthesiologist, the lead nurse, and all the others in there, I mean, they're not a team that's trained together and works together. I mean, they're like a pickup team.
Right.
And so they come together, and they have a briefing, and they have a protocol that they go through and check. Hey, this is who. I mean, they go through. I'm Scott. I'm the anesthesiologist. I understand that this is what we're doing. I'm using this. This is what I'm using for this patient. And so, I mean, that was a really good book, and it really hammers home the importance of having good checklists and the amount of equipment and the complexity of what we ask young soldiers and airmen and sailors to do. It requires it. It requires checklists. I mean, we have a lot of those that are online, but they have to be deployable too. So I would say Checklist Manifesto. Another one I just read recently, I wish I would have read it 100 years ago. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People, written by Dale Carnegie 80 years ago. Probably one of my biggest regrets is my ability to communicate. I mean, probably a shortcoming. I could communicate well, but it's my responsibility to be able to connect with the receiver, the person who's receiving the information. And everybody doesn't receive information the same way. I used to tell people I used to say it, and I thought it was pretty funny, and it is kind of funny, but it's also sad. I mean, I can't say this any more clearly. I can only say it louder. Or I probably could have said it more clearly. I would have had to find a different way to communicate it. And so our ability to communicate is critical. And like we spoke earlier, our young service members, they need to know why. So we need to be able to explain it to them.
You know, the fact that the thing that I love about this conversation and kind of started like bro crushing for you last week when we met and kind of spoke on the phone was here you would have two old guys, right, who you wouldn't think could embrace a younger generation and embrace the fact that they see things differently, they hear things differently, they kind of internalize things differently, and yet here you're open-minded enough as a very successful soldier in the United States military. Are there more like you? Do you think you're ahead of the power curve, or what specifically do you think helped make you so open-minded and progressive, for lack of a better term, to adopt some of these new ways of dealing with the younger generation?
I don't know that was progressive or anything. I mean, I just spent a lot of time with them. I mean, I did not get out of the operational force. And so I was just with them all the time. And so I was comfortable going to different places and seeing, and the more I got exposed to it, I mean, I would call it sometimes being curious, because I didn't spend time with people that were like me. I knew how the infantry, I would go down and check infantry units and see how they were doing, but then I would go out and spend time and try to work with logistics units, aviation units. I didn't have an admin NCO until, I mean, I was like an admin, somebody to help me, until I was a division sergeant major. A lot of times the people that had admin NCOs, they would pick somebody that looked like them. I mean, they would, if they were an infantryman, they would have an infantryman and that's okay. I mean, but I didn't want somebody like that. I already knew I had a dental tech as an admin NCO, and I also had a female. I mean, I didn't need an infantryman to tell me what's going on the line down there, because I felt pretty comfortable understanding what they're doing down there. But somebody that's been in a Charlie Med, that's a female. I mean, especially when we're bringing women into the combat arms, I mean, that's somebody that's valuable when we're talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, those type of things. When we're talking about sharp stuff, having somebody that has a different perspective than I do. I already know how I think, and those that are around me, how we think, right? Yeah. So taking information from others and then sharing those things that I'm getting ready to send out, it was really valuable to have that. So I don't know if that's being progressive. I mean, it just worked for me.
Well, you know, and again, like for me, obviously with Kate, with carrying alignment, perspective, and expectations, you know, you fulfill the requirement of perspective there when you're going out deliberately finding somebody or seeking out somebody who probably doesn't see it the same or internalize it the same or feel it the same way. So you have the benefit of at least one other data point in order to go forward. So, you know, huge kudos for that being a purposeful thing that you did to help connect to the random smattering of all the different soldiers that you may find in any of your units.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Then some other books I'll tell you what, anything Simon Sinek writes, I just recently read The Infinite Game. I mean, love what he wrote, especially about his analogy with the SEALs and competence and trust, showing that. I thought that was really good. And Good to Great is another one. You know, find good people. You know, get them on the bus, get them in the right seats. So I mean, those are a few. And then Anti-Fragile is a book. When you're talking about, during the break we were talking about resilience. I hate that word. And I mean, it's just, I understood it up front. I understand it now, but it's become more like a I mean, it's a buzzword in many respects now. And in Anti-Fragile, it starts off, it talks about a candle and a fire and the wind blowing. And when the wind blows on a candle, it's fragile, it goes out. The fire is anti-fragile. It grows from stress being put on it. And that's how we grow. That's how we learn. Whether physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, I mean, you grow from stress. You can't get stronger. You have to get in the gym, and you have to be under a load, and everybody's load is different. So that's why it's important to know where your point of failure is, because we learn the most right before our points of failure as an individual or as a team. And so I think that's a really good book. at least the first 150 to 170 pages of that book. And then he gets into his doctorate thesis. And I mean, it really got a little bit above my head, but the first 150 pages were really good.
So with that, number one, thank you for sharing all those books and the advice for that. But then just going back to you generally, and I think maybe we've touched on this here and there, so this may be a redundant question, I apologize, but what advice do you have just for leaders, right? For anyone who's interested in leadership, military or not, passionate about leadership, they want to make a difference, what could you offer for them?
What could I offer for them? What would I ask?
Or I'm sorry, like what advice would you give them, you know, if they're looking to find success as a leader?
Yeah, know yourself, know your people, know your mission. And I would say, just like I said before, I mean, leadership's not about your personal excellence. It's about putting those that you lead in positions to excel. I mean, it becomes less about, as a leader, it's less about us and our success. And it's more about those that we lead. It's more about their success.
So with that advice and talking about some of these books, as I mentioned earlier, you yourself have written a book, Behind the Colors. If you would mind just kind of go into some of the detail about why you wrote it and what's in it.
Yeah, so the last several years I was in the Army, it was all about understanding your role, and a non-commissioned officer's role is clearly articulated in Army Regulation 600-20, which is Army Command Policy, and it talks about what the role of the commissioned officer is and the role of the non-commissioned officer, and oftentimes most could not articulate what the role of the non-commissioned officer was inside an organization. And I mean, so it's about setting expectations, and leaders need to know, one, I need to know what my role is and what's expected of me as a leader, but my commander and the person that's in charge needs to also understand what my role is supposed to be and know how to use me. It's like any other type of device or tool. I mean, this is a pencil. I mean, this is a pencil. This is what it's used for. I can use it for a lot of different things, but it's best utilized when used in how it's designed to be used. And so that's really what it was designed to do, is talk about what the role is of the non-commissioned officer. And then at every echelon of leadership, what are the 3 skills that can be developed and built upon at every level? So for example, at the most basic level of leadership, the 3 skills are: lead by personal example, train individual team and crew tasks, and inspect. If we could get all entry-level leaders, specifically, but I think for all services, if we could get them all to lead by personal example, train individual team and crew task, and inspect, that would set a outstanding foundation for everything that they do for the rest of their time in service. And then there's 3 skills for every enlisted grade that I defined.
So what kind of prompted you to write the book? Obviously, there's the Army regulations for that, but as far as what about this is going to make a difference? And again, like I said, I'm halfway through it. Number one, the thing that gripped me right off the bat was the humanity of it. Whether it's how you were raised, where you were raised, and whether it was your early years as a soldier, before you get into a lot of that stuff. Because again, like for me, one of the biggest reasons I have this podcast, why I have this YouTube channel, why I want to write my books is, like, I want to humanize a lot of the senior leadership positions that you'll find throughout the United States military and hopefully the world. Because as you yourself had mentioned, you didn't join the Army thinking you would rise to either that rank or that position. I know I didn't think that. Lord knows my bosses at Fort Bragg didn't think I would ever do it, right? So I wasn't grown or mentored into those positions. But again, for me, it's been one of those things where I think I have a slightly different perspective. And I think you have a slightly different perspective, and perhaps that's it. And is there, I guess maybe my main question is it, and not trying to use leading language, is there anything missing through Army regulations or doctrine or professional military education that you were trying to add to with your book? Any specific things that may have been missed that you're trying to add value to a soldier's life?
Really, I was trying to add perspective and then help people see. I mean, really, the title of the book is Behind the Colors, where NCO leadership lives. And really, I mean, that's a symbol of the colors being the colors of the organization, and the commander and colors come forward for a change of command. And what's left behind the colors is in the place of the sergeant major in an organization that has colors is behind those colors. And so everything behind there. So that's part of knowing and understanding your role and appreciating your role. There are a lot of leadership books that are out in the private space, but there are very few that are written by non-commissioned officers. And so that was my reason for writing it, something that would be available for soldiers regardless of what career field they were in. I mean, it's a lot of combat arms type stuff, but I mean, I think you could glean some stuff off that from any MOS or any career field.
Okay, fair enough. As we get into the closing minutes of the podcast, I kind of end it with two, what I would hope to be a little bit fun type of questions. And again, I think it's important for others to understand, a little about who you are as a human being. So the first question is, what do you do to restore your soul on a daily basis? What do you do where you can go out there every single day or every week that makes Scott Schroeder the best version of you that you can possibly be?
Yeah, I do. I try to read. And so I try to find something to read. I just finished a really good book about this lady from my hometown that Gladys West, and it was an amazing book, an amazing story. And she was born in the 30s, and she was a black lady born in the 30s, and in poverty during Jim Crow, so she was up against everything. She went to school, she received a scholarship to attend college. She went to the college. She got a degree in math, and then she ended up working at a naval weapons service laboratory, and she was partly responsible for what we use every day as the GPS.
Jeez.
Amazing. And she, in 1950, I mean, in the 50s, she got hired to go work at the Naval Surface Weapons Laboratory to start working on this stuff. It was a pretty amazing book. It was great. And she overcame a lot in her time. I mean, she overcame racism. She overcame gender bias. She overcame poverty, isolation. She overcame all those. And it was amazing what she did.
Jeez.
Marla, we can hear you.
Okay. So last little bit fun question there. And this I kind of ask of everyone.
Oh, the other thing, I'm sorry, Chachi, one of the other things I do is I ride my bike. So I get between 120 and 180 miles a week. So that gives me time to reflect on what I'm doing, gives me time to get stuff done. Then I try to work out some too. So,
wow, 120 to 180 miles a week. Impressive. Holy cow. Okay, so this may tie into this next question, and it's a fun one. This is a question that I had during one of my executive transition assistance program classes, and again, it was a question that I hadn't thought about, and it kind of knocked me on my butt when I heard it. But amazing question. So I end all my podcast with these two questions. So this last one is: what would you do in life if money were no object and you knew you could not fail?
Yeah, that's a tough, that is a tough question. And I've really thought about it, and, and I struggle with that every day. I still go back and forth from, you know, what I can do, what I want to do. And I'm still working on that.
Right.
I really am still working on that. If others, I mean, I did best ranger competition several years back, and I did that thing. And one thing that I realized in doing that, because fitness was my hobby, well, when that became my job, I mean, it wasn't as much fun. And so from 7 o'clock in the morning until, 1800 in the afternoon, doing nothing but working out and doing stuff associated with that, then I found myself on the weekends, I had no hobby. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I don't know if I want my hobby to be my profession or my profession to be my hobby. I mean, that you're told if you find something you're passionate about, you won't work a day in your life. I'm still working on it. And so when I find it, I will let you know. I think I'd like to go into training business, like what you're trying to do. That's kind of where I'd like to be able to go. But I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, nice. And again, when I first heard it, I didn't have an answer for that either. So yeah, it's very interesting how this plays out. And so thank you so much for being here. And before we get into closing thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been watching this, again, you really don't have to look hard to hear Cape stuff, right? We heard caring all through this, right? So you need to understand, you need to accept, you need to appreciate your role, right? That is all about caring. And then lastly with that, like, you need to align yourself with that. We talked about, the understanding of different perspectives and whether you can't teach experience, but you can share different things. You can have conversations, and then we talked about the expectations that are levied in AR 600-20, right? We talked about the expectations of a core and a command sergeant major, right? As far as how this plays out. So our ability to have these conversations, a good, well-meaning conversation that takes it from an interesting conversation to a compelling conversation, is absolutely huge. So with that, Scott, I want to say thank you for being on the Cape Lead Revolution. I want you to leave us with some parting thoughts, and also, where can we find you? Social media, where can we find your book? How does all that work?
Yeah. So one thing, you were asking me about the books, and one thing I didn't mention is one of the things we talked about in the break, and it was, you mentioned movies. I'll tell you one movie that, yes, like favorites. One of my favorite movies. Take a guess. What do you think it is?
We Were Soldiers.
No. The Legend of Bagger Vance. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but I think I could do a leadership series on the Legend of Bagger Vance. I think you could take that film and cut it to pieces. And have you watched it?
It's been years, but it's like Matt Damon and Will Smith. Yes.
Yeah, it's an amazing movie, and a lot of leadership lessons to be gleaned from that show, and it's great just to listen to. So that's why I just wanted to have a mulligan on that. I mean, I use the term mulligan for the Legend of Bagger Vance, right? So I use that. And hey, if anybody, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, and if anybody's interested in the book, I mean, you can get the book. It's on Amazon, and it's on Kindle. You can get it through Amazon. It's on Kindle. And anybody that wants a personalized or signed copy, I mean, they can go to schroedercoaching.com, and it's available there. Just put a note, they can get it there. But I really appreciate you having me.
It was. I thank you for finding the time. I had an amazing time, and everybody out there, I hope you had a good time as well. So stay tuned. Look up Scott's stuff. Get the book. You're not going to regret it. But I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll catch you here next time on the Cape Lead Revolution. And this is Chacha reminding you to always educate, anticipate, and dominate. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. See you.